I'm Mary Sheeran, and my new novel is called Banished from Memory. It is 1960, and 16-year-old Dianna Fletcher has been accustomed to the bright lights of Hollywood all her life, but now they're casting shadows on her family's past and on her own future. Dianna fears she is losing her talent and failing to live up to her family's legacy. When she does land a part, she finds an unexpected enemy in brilliant actor and womanizer Bill Royce, who not only attacks her confidence, but holds a deep grudge against her family. Dianna comes to believe Bill's resentment is related to her suspicion that her parents harbor a secret linked to the blacklist. But even as their friendship grows, despite their misgivings about each other, Bill will not confess what he knows. And as Dianna struggles with her career in a rapidly changing industry, she urges Bill to share his dark past with her, only to discover secrets that could destroy her family's prestige and power. Banished from Memory highlights the conflicted relationship between two legacies of the blacklist, the sunset of classic Hollywood, the challenges and gifts of acting, and a determination on the part of one generation to exhume the truth of another's, but at what cost?
Book lovers unite! I'm Demethius Jackson, and you're listening to the Chapter 1 podcast. The greatest stories ever written all begin with Chapter 1. In each episode, our guest authors will share their first chapters with you. Hey, everybody. On today's episode, we're going to be speaking with Mary Sheeran, the author of an incredible book called Banished from Memory that talks about the Hollywood blacklist and a lot of the social issues that took place in Hollywood during the 1960s. Mary has written an extremely intricate and detailed book, and her wealth of history is just absolutely phenomenal. So here we go. Mary Sheeran, Banished from Memory, starts right now.
I'm going to start in the midst of Chapter 2. It's the announcing of the Academy Award nominations for the year 1959. We're in February 1960. It's at the Coconut Grove. All the stars are gathered because for some reason the studios decided they wanted to get television in on this, their arch enemy television. And so they're going to film this almost live, the announcement of the Oscar nominations for the movies. And Frank Sinatra is an MC, and so is Charlton Heston, and I'm just going to read a bit of that. And action, someone yelled. In 5, 4, 3, 2, the band played something resembling a flourish. Frank Sinatra walked on the stage and sang High Hopes from his movie A Hole in the Head. He then became the most important man in the room, and oh, he knew it, pulling an envelope from his breast pocket with a warm, smug smile. From endless chatter and shrieks of pretended joy, now the room fell totally silent. Here are the Academy Award nominations. Just in, said Sinatra. I haven't looked. See? A sealed envelope. Fuck you haven't, Anne whispered. Dianna played with her lobster. She thought of how most child stars never made it out of adolescence, how most of her friends had given up and gone back to school, and how she couldn't. Nor could she play dumb teens or girls in bikinis or the victim of a teenage werewolf. She came to attention as Charlton Heston replaced Sinatra, who immediately headed to a table near Ava Gardner's. Much good it will do him, said Anne. For black and white costume design, Heston began. The nominees are Edith Head for Career, Charles Lemaire and Mary Wills for The Diary of Anne Frank, Helen Rose for The Gazebo, Ori Kelly for Some Like It Hot, and Howard Shoup for The Philadelphian. Now, Career had starred Tony Franciosa, playing an actor with big dreams. Its storyline involved the blacklist, which Dianna found difficult to understand. She had no sympathy for people who loved Russia and didn't understand the gift of freedom in the United States. How could any artist prefer communism? And how could Sinatra want to hire a communist writer? She had mixed feelings about Some Like It Hot, too. about two men dressing as women to evade the mob. She'd been uncomfortable with the use of Marilyn Monroe's body for comic effect, the train steam aiming at her rear end, the camera's fascination with her legs, the need for Marilyn to jiggle chest and rear end and use a silly voice. Sex is a game, said the movie, and we're all tricking each other. The two men playing women kept being annoyed by being pinched. It wouldn't occur to them that women would be annoyed by the very same behavior. On the contrary, the movie seemed to say, women should be honored by any attention from men. Stupid. The ambitions and emotions of the girls who invade the glamorous world of the big city, seeking success, love, money, and the best of everything, and who often settle for much less. Were these women being punished for their ambition? Diana thought. Lee Remick, a knockout figure in slacks, but obviously a jerk, had breasts that seemed to grow more pointed, and the men kept looking at her. Diana liked Eve Arden, an old friend of her mother's who lent a touch of reality and real woman to the business, but who would want to be her. Movies seemed to be running in the direction of calling independent women cold and frozen, or considering women who worked not to be women at all. At least the characters she played were rewarded for having gumption. But if those characters grew older, Diana fretted, they would disappear or be humiliated. The men just kept going on as they had been, still chasing after young women and even underage girls. No wonder her mother was getting touchy about her career. No wonder she wanted an Oscar. Good, meaty parts for women were disappearing. Except for Hitchcock, of all people. Diana usually loathed his movies, but North by Northwest, for all of the parts that year Diana thought she'd love to do, other than most of the parts her mother played, Eva Marie Saint's part topped the list. Cool, direct, working for her country, yet free. The room grew dramatically quiet, the small talk ceasing as if on cue. Heston was about to announce the major nominations. A camera dollied up to their table. They all smiled at Heston. Anne leaned against John, and he put his arm around her. Heston began. The best performance by an actress in a supporting role, Hermione Badley in Room at the Top, Susan Kohner in Imitation of Life, Juanita Moore in Imitation of Life, Thelma Ritter in Pillow Talk, and Shelley Winters for The Diary of Anne Frank. For the best performance by an actress in a leading role, Diana caught her mother's eye and put her hands together in a championship grip. Her mother had to be nominated. Heston said, Doris Day in Pillow Talk. Oh, shit, Anne whispered. Then Heston said, Dianna Fletcher in The Diary of Anne Frank. Whoa, said Nick. Diana, called John. Hey, scrapper, yelled Stuart. A photographer snapped Diana with her jaw down. Heston then said, Anne Foster in The Nun Story. The room exploded with gasps and shrieks, and John spread out his arms, grabbed his wife, and gave her one huge, long kiss. The cameras went mad, not sure which Fletcher to close in on. John lifted Diana into a hug, and as he sat her down, she saw George Stevens, her director, Best Director nominee, standing. He put his hand over his heart. She nodded to him, and what else could she do? Blew him a kiss. Nick kissed her. Sherry kissed her. Diana turned to kiss her mother, and as she did, she saw cold eyes and a frozen smile. As the photographer snapped away, Diana sat down slowly, her smile growing more forced as her mother's reaction sank in. Diana's eyes blurred with all the flashbulbs going off. She saw a stare steal her mother away from Sinatra and looked happy enough, and Diana began to relax. We are so proud, said her father. Jimmy Stewart cut in. Let a real man dance with her, and he stooped down to dance cheek to cheek. Was that a stag line forming for her? Did this mean she could go on and be in real movies again? Would her talent come back now? She spun from partner to partner, was offered a little wine here and a little champagne there, and Diana started asking other men who were happy to oblige. Charlton Heston, Jack Lemmon, Bobby Darin, Pat Boone, even Ed Wynn, who offered her a sip of champagne. As she backed away from the table, she bumped into a couple. Turning, she saw William Royce dancing with Tuesday Weld. She had to dance with him. Hi, she said. Congratulations. He seemed startled. May I cut in? She asked. She was about to tell him how much she had admired his performance, but the look in his eyes stopped her, for his smile faded, his eyes narrowed, and Diana thought for a weird moment that he was going to hit her. He stopped dancing and released Weld, who waved at Dianna and moved on. Dianna smiled. She must have read him wrong. Royce looked down at her. Do you think you're a real nominee? I beg your pardon? It's pretty well known that Disney and your family paid for your nomination, he said, barely moving a facial muscle, his voice low with a gravelly sensation Dianna found compelling, except that it made what he said far worse. As it sank in, she felt it between her eyes and in her gut. Now he gestured with his head as if to say, Scram, kid, and he walked away to Sandra D. You're lost, she muttered to his back, and she hurried through the crowd. Someone said in her earshot, now the Fletchers can only go down. She stared at the man, a producer at the flailing 20th Century Fox. Seeing her, the producer blew a kiss. The hypocrisy of that kiss blew into the room, widening its lens until all the congratulations and the excitement appeared as bitterness or power-grabbing. She could not stand to look at it, for this was the world she loved betraying her even as it congratulated her, even as her nomination had been paid for to prove the superiority of the Fletcher family, and how much else was paid for. She hurried to the ladies' room, flung herself into a stall, and beat a fist against the locked door. Her despair turned entirely on herself. She had not been nominated for any other award. Why an Oscar? It made sense. Disney and your family paid for your nomination. If this Royce fellow knew about it, most people would too. Why would he lie? She'd never met him, never seen any other movie of his. No one in her family had worked with him. What he said had to be true. Of all the people in the room, he was the most honest.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think within that scene, not only did you set up the story, but I think you also set up a lot of the issues that were going on during that time.
Between the women's roles in movies and the attitude towards women in the movies, that this all started kind of as a result of the blacklist in part, women's roles, and a shift in them, more insistence on domestic, more insistent on sexuality. That also had to do with the movies wanting to lure people away from television. Also, the relationship with her mother, the family, and also there was a mention of the blacklist in the one of the movies.
So you do mention the blacklist, and I'm wondering if that has to do with your title as well, or if that inspired your title, Banished from Memory.
Well, yes and no. The title originally, when I started this, was Damnatio Memoriae. And yes, it is inspired by the blacklist, but Damnatio Memoriae, which in English means banished from memory, that was something that the ancient Romans, when there was an emperor ascending to power, he wanted to chisel out the faces, the name of his predecessor. So they would do that. They'd send out his people and they demolish the faces, they'd erase the names and so forth, if he, really didn't like the guy. And that was Damnatio Memoriae, to erase the fact that he had ever happened. And that happened particularly to writers. It also happened to actors. It's harder to say with specificity that this actor lost a part because he was blacklisted or so forth. But if your name was on the list, or if you pled the First or Fifth Amendment, you were definitely in trouble. But the writers in particular, even if they wrote the script, another name would be substituted for their name in credits. So you have incidents like, I think it was 57, the Oscar winner for one of the screenplays was Robert Rich. Nobody came up, and they assumed it was a blacklisted writer, and it was Dalton Trumbo. And in the back of the novel, I have some of the restoration of credits that are going on. The Screenwriters Guild are trying to restore the credits since about the 1990s. It's a horrendous task because they have to track down who actually did the writing, were there fronts, were there pseudonyms, what happened.
So I wonder, how did one find themselves blacklisted back then? Was it just because someone didn't like you, or were there other reasons?
The blacklist was part of the anti-communist fear. And you think McCarthy, which is when I started this, I had it all kind of, my idea of the blacklist was very blurry. It had to do with Joe McCarthy and accusing people of being communists, and he never found one. But the fear of communism was started pretty early on because of labor unrest, and Hollywood had a lot of labor unrest, especially in the 30s. And some violent strikes. Police called out, the studios getting security people and hosing down strikers. It was a miserable thing. The red and blue, I guess you'd call it, or the conservative, it's hard to divide it into parties, but the people who had been adamantly pro-union, strong union, they tended to associate with the Communist Party, if not join it, because the Communist Party was for that, in America, I should say. And they were also for civil rights, women's rights to some extent, and a national health insurance. We're still working on this. So people who were activists in that area and in Hollywood would join up with the Communist Party, if not become members of it. That was suspect.
So Hollywood in the 1960s is a pretty unique setting for a book in general. What was it that actually inspired you to write about this particular era?
Well, I wrote a book called Who Have the Power, and it has a bit of time travel in it. And there's a character who ended up being Dianna Fletcher, the protagonist in Banished from Memory. And she was an older woman at this point and Have the Power. And when I finished that, I wanted to write a book about family secrets, pretty much my family secrets, and a more contemporary book. And Dianna just said, no, you got to write about my family. So I had to stop what I was doing because she wouldn't let it go. And I thought, well, what's your secret?
Sure.
And what I did was I was doing a cabaret show at the time. So when I wasn't working on that, I was trying to find out the movies her parents were in, the movies she would have been in. So I was looking at movies from the late 30s through the early 60s. And as I listened to the commentaries of those movies, the 40s, I realized that the blacklist was an issue. And I had to educate myself on what the blacklist was and how it affected people.
And I was wondering how you were able to research that era. Were you always into classic Hollywood, or was it something that you kind of tackled as a research project and just delved deep into the notes?
I just got into it. And when you started, it was, see, what movies do I like? And the kind of parts her parents would have been in, Diana's parents, because she was born in, I think, 43. She's 16 in 60. And her parents would have been late 30s or 40s and 50s. So getting movies that they would have be in the type of movies that they would have been in, and that. So I was looking at those, and I was also looking at Disney's movies because I decided that the kids would be working for Disney in the late 50s, early 60s. And that was the beginning of his departure from animation because it cost so much, to the Fred MacMurray films, the Shaggy Dog, and that sort of thing. I guess 2014, I started really working on this.
Could you tell us a little bit about Dianna Fletcher, who's your main character?
She's been a star since she was age 7. She sacrificed her life so her father could live. He was a judge in that movie and became very famous, but she has a natural talent. And she has been in movies all the time, except a couple times she's had to go to regular school when there was no movie. Maybe she made a movie a year. When she went to regular school, she had a miserable time, and she was assaulted, actually. A bunch of boys lured her into a locker room for some nefarious purpose in the 8th grade. And a teacher broke it up and blamed her for it because she was an actress. That's what you get.
And then at some point she meets
Bill Royce, who, he doesn't make a very good impression on her by saying she didn't deserve the Oscar nomination. He's the hot rising new star, and she's cast in a TV movie production of Picnic. And she plays Millie, and she cannot figure that part out at all. And she is stuck. And she's also being sent out all over the place on publicity stuff, and she's overworked. And she comes in late. She doesn't know her lines all the time. She doesn't get the character. And, he's not sympathetic to her at all when she goes to ask advice or whatever.
Would you say that this story is more about Dianna coming of age and finding her own empowerment? Or is it a story more about other social dynamics?
Well, it is basically a coming of age story and Dianna finding her place. It involves layerings of family secrets, which do involve the blacklist. So that's where that comes in on. And so there is a certain amount of a political element. She does try working to find both her acting voice and her voice as a young woman.
Well, it's definitely an intricately social, emotional, and psychological story. And I'm just wondering, like, what in the world was the writing process like for you? Did you just like lock yourself in a room and just completely shut yourself out to write this?
I wish I could have, because I do have a day job, and I alternate singing and writing, but this took a long time. This did take a long time. At first, figuring out what the story was and whether to tell Anne's story. Anne has a backstory that deserves its own book, but I decided to focus on Dianna and the year 1960 and the setting of Hollywood at that point, because they're going back into the past to find out what happened with her parents, with his family. And so his family was devastated by the blacklist. So he has an issue there. But to write it, I had to write a very, very long 400,000 word first draft because I had to figure out what the story was and where to focus. And then I honed that in half.
Whoa. You said 400,000 words.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, I can pour them out. Yeah, I can. But that's just, the rough, where am I? Who am I? What am I doing? And then figuring out what part of the story you want to focus on, how to do it. And then, of course, there was what movies to do and what stars to bring in. And so it was reading about the blacklist, yes, but I was also reading an awful lot of books about Hollywood, about the movies, biographies of stars. I had to I cut the manuscript down to about 200,000 some words. And then I said, help. And I went to an editor and she was tremendous. She read it over and over and over. She loved it. She cried at the end. Thank you very much. But she helped a lot in guiding me where the story was. So it's a little less than 200,000 words now. It's still a long book.
That's amazing.
But it required, really focusing in. And there are parts that I desperately wish were in there and they're not. There's a whole opening I had to chuck, but that's the way it goes, you know.
And you can also, take those extra snippets and you can post them on your website, or you can maybe read them on YouTube, or even if you wanted to do something like Patreon, actually, you could release those chapters to people who become your patrons. So you got options.
That's true. And there are more options now.
So what do you really want people to take away from the story? Well,
I think someone said to me the other day, it's really a romance, right? And I think she was kind of hopeful about it. And it is, but it is as a coming of age story. I would like people to remember what the blacklist was, its effects on people. It's not just that people didn't get parts for 10 years or so, or didn't get to write, or lost their jobs. I mean, that's a horrible thing, but it had its effect on another generation and another generation beyond that. But the overall thing, I think, is to understand and maybe look a little deeper about what the blacklist was and what it means to people in a country that says you should not be accosted in any way because of your beliefs, because of your political beliefs, not for what you believe, maybe for what you do, but not for what you believe or for what people think you believe.
Yeah. And I can't help but wonder, what would Hollywood today resemble if there were no blacklist? And I know that's pure speculation.
Yeah. I sometimes think we have kind of blacklist in reverse, like people not wanting to go see a movie with Jane Fonda in it. The blacklist, I had a very vague idea of the blacklist, and part of it was the reaction to Elia Kazan getting an honorary Oscar some years ago. It divided Hollywood. People were fighting about it. I mean, they still do fight about it. Kazan named names, as they say. And that was a pretty awful thing to do, but people did it to save their careers. Kazan did it. Jerome Robbins did it. And people in Hollywood are still bitter about that. And it showed when Kazan came to claim his award. And he did a lousy thing. People could have, there was something called the McCarran Act in the 50s, I think it passed, and they were going to round up suspected subversives during a national emergency and intern them in camps. That's real. They allocated millions of dollars for these camps, and they'd already done it with the Americans of Japanese descent during World War II. So people's lives and their families were terribly affected by their names being given off by someone saving his career. But on the other hand, it's Kazan, it's Jerome Robbins. Would there have been a West Side Story if Jerome Robbins had not named names? And here's another thing, and it kind of goes in with the Me Too movement, and there's some snitches of that in this book, but we don't call it that. But what do we do with people whose careers we admire, whose work we admire, and at the same time they do something so compellingly awful to us that we can't even stomach it? How do we balance that? And that's certainly going on in all the arts. Is certainly going on in Hollywood now.
Absolutely. And I mean, whether there's a blacklist or not, I feel like there's always going to be an instance of that whenever you have certain people with a certain level of power, a certain level of affluence, and those trying to reach to get into those positions as well.
Yes. We have to be on our guard.
Okay. So are you working on anything currently? Anything new?
I do have a book coming out in January. It's called A Dangerous Liberty, and it's historical Virginia City, Nevada, post-Civil War issues. And that's being put out by Prairie Rose Publishing. But I'm trying to get back to my family secret book. But you start something and something will say, hey, over here. So I'm seeing where it's going kind of part now, because this book took an awful lot of time and work, and finishing it and doing some readings and interviews and articles about it, or about the background about it. It's just been exhausting. And I feel,
absolutely.
I just have to be quiet a bit and see what's going to happen. But I kind of like to get back to that other book that is waving at me. But who knows? At the moment, I don't know.
Well, giving the challenge or the burden that may have been to write, you've definitely created a masterpiece. I will say that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the time you put into this book. Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today.
And it's been my pleasure. It's fun.
Where can readers go online to learn more about you and your books?
Well, there is banishedfrommemory.com. If you forget that, you can go to marysharan-books.com. Just type my name. The books are on Amazon. All my books are on Amazon. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. Anywhere you can get a book, you can get this. Or you can, fancy this, walk into a bookstore and order it. And you, if you happen to be lucky enough to live near a bookstore, I live in the Bronx and they've taken all the bookstores away.
Oh, wow.
Well, I think one came somewhere far away from me, but yeah. But you can go into a bookstore, and I don't think they'll have it. They might, but you can order it and get it in a couple of days. But Amazon is pretty good.
And with that, we're going to wrap up another episode. Thanks again to Mary Sheeran. If you have any questions or comments for her, or for me, or you know an author who you think would be a good fit for the show, let me know. Connect with me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or send an email to info@ch1podcast.com. Check out our website at ch1podcast.com, where there you can listen to previous episodes and hopefully find your next favorite author. Subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Overcast, everywhere podcasts can be downloaded. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. But most importantly, tell everyone you know about the show, because that is how we grow. All right. Thank you once again for listening to another episode. You all stay awesome. Till next time.